especially that, I think it's a suicidal. The South African civil service is the highest paid in the world as a percentage of GDP. President Ramaphosa has been a very weak president for the ANC.
Do you think it's the end of the road for the ANC? Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and today I'm extremely excited and honored to be joined by one of South Africa's premier public intellectuals, authors, business persons, someone who you have begged me to get on the channel, and we have delivered. Mr. Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Thanks for having me, Cyril. I'm glad to be here at last.
Indeed, indeed. Now that I have you here, I've officially arrived, so we're done after this.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for coming on. And, you know, there's so much happening in our country right now. Maybe we can start with foreign affairs, because, of course, we've got this very aggressive posture from the US coming out towards South Africa. What do you make of the US administration's moves to target South Africa?
Well, I'm not sure if they are targeting South Africa or if we have long-standing disagreements with the Americans. So it's actually quite a long story, the relationship, especially the relationship, not so much with South Africa, but with the ANC.
Sure.
So I'm more inclined to see this as being an ANC Republican issue rather than a South Africa United States issue.
Very interesting.
I think the South Africans, the population generally, is very well disposed towards the United States.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that in terms of per capita consumption of Coca-Cola, we are number 2 to the Americans.
Oh, there you go.
So the population is very well disposed towards the United States. And generally, I think our business community is well disposed. Our religious communities is well disposed. Our young people are in with hip hop and all sorts of American type things.
Wow, even hip hop. I didn't know you knew about hip hop.
I watch your channel, so that's how I know. So the population is well disposed, and I think the American population is very well disposed towards South Africa.
True.
If you remember, in the 1980s, the American population had huge campaigns against apartheid and huge campaigns to get the United States government to impose sanctions on South Africa. And both the Democratic Party and the Republican parties eventually succeeded against President Reagan, and who was against the imposition of sanctions. So the country-to-country, people-to-people relations between South Africa and the United States, I think it's good, and I think it's still good. The challenge we have, I think, comes in a way from the ANC and its history, especially during its years in exile. During its years in exile, the ANC involved itself in the Cold War. That is one of the problems or the triggers, I think. Now, the ANC technically was not a communist party, although it had an alliance with the Communist Party. But anyway, it was supposed to be non-aligned, but it supported the Soviet Union. So I suspect there are grudges from the Republican side that go back to those days, when the ANC was supporting the Soviet Union against the Americans and against the West. Also, as you saw with Zelensky, the Republican Party did support the sanctions eventually, and they participated in a vote override of a veto by their own Republican president, which was President Reagan, who was opposing the sanctions. But the Congress people in the Republican Party voted with the Democrats to override President Reagan's veto in opposition. I don't think the ANC ever went to say thank you. You know, now we know after watching Zelensky, we know how much the Republicans want to be thanked.
Must say thank you. Yeah.
The ANC never went back to say thank you to the Republicans.
Interesting.
So I think this whole relationship between ANC and Republicans is more an issue rather than a United States, South Africa problem. That's how I tend to see it.
What did you make of the whole fracas around Ambassador Rasool and his being declared persona non grata via Twitter, effectively?
Yeah, you know, the President Trump and his team, they love using Twitter. So you have to know that.
Sure.
If you are an ambassador, you have to know that they will deal with you via Twitter.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think our ambassador, to me, I watched his interventions with the Mapungubwe Institute.
Yeah.
I don't think as an ambassador, it was for him to go and make public address about analysis of the ruling party in the United States. He's there to represent the president of South Africa. And he is there to make analysis of what's going on in the United States, and especially how what is going on is affecting South Africa's interests. But he is supposed to report to the president of South Africa, not to the public, not to you and me, not to the general public.
Right.
So where our ambassador went wrong is that instead of reporting through closed communication channels of what he thought of the administration, he goes to a public media and expresses his criticism of his host and of the host government and of the host president. So in a way, I think he was provoking the Americans, and he got the response, which I guess he must have thought it could happen. Maybe he thought it wouldn't happen so quickly, but anyway, it happened, and I hope that if we have an ambassador from outside coming to South Africa who say things about our president that Ambassador Rasool said about President Trump, I hope we would deport them also.
What do you say to those who say that it seems like the Trump administration was just looking for any excuse? And even before Ambassador Rasool was declared persona non grata, they've been making quite a lot of these quite aggressive statements.
No, it's true. It's true that, you know, we've had AfriForum going to the United States,
yes, of course, yeah,
to denounce the South African government for one reason or another. Unfortunately, there are one or two or three South African right-wingers like Elon Musk who are close to the Republican Party, who are receptive to right-wing messages from South Africa. But that's the reality.
Sure.
That we know.
That's
and if you are an ambassador, you are supposed to understand that this government, those are the people who influence it. And so you manage the situation accordingly. Yeah. So I agree that there is a lot of ill feeling. But as I say, I think it is more to do with the ANC and the Republican Party than with South Africa as a country.
Yeah, it's a fascinating take because we haven't disaggregated the US down to the Republican administration and the ANC. And I haven't actually heard that analysis anywhere else. So very interesting. What do you make of the AfriForums of this world? Do you think it's a real problem that the South African state should be grappling with? Or do you think we should just ignore AfriForum as a kind of... shall we say, a very irritating mosquito?
Yes, I think AfriForum is an irritating mosquito. But we shouldn't forget, the South Africans, the great majority of us, especially those in the liberation movement, went around the world denouncing the apartheid regime to other governments and asking other governments to take action against the apartheid regime. I was in a technical committee of the Commonwealth in the 1980s, which was imposing sanctions on South Africa. In fact, it was the Commonwealth Sanctions Committee that persuaded the U.S. Congress to impose sanctions on South Africa.
So we have you to thank for that.
So we were doing, AfriForum is following in our footsteps. As it happened, the government of the day, the apartheid government of South, was furious with us going around the world saying, don't buy South African oranges, and so on. I remember addressing a meeting of dock workers in Liverpool saying, don't offload a ship from South Africa. There was a ship which was coming from South Africa. I can't remember what it was carrying. So I was sent there by the ANC to go and persuade the dock workers not to offload the ship. So AfriForum is doing what we used to do. So yes, now, of course, we think, AfriForum, you are bad. You're saying also that the apartheid regime said we were telling lies. So we are saying AfriForum is telling lies. The apartheid regime said you guys who wanted sanctions were telling lies. And they wanted to arrest people like Desmond Tutu who supported sanctions. So I think, I don't support the idea of charging AfriForum with treason. I don't think they're free to say what they want to say to whoever they want to say. That's why we fought for democracy and made all the sacrifices. I would like to find out from AfriForum, where were they when we were fighting for freedom of speech and for democracy in South Africa? But that's another matter. But
Absolutely.
They are free to talk to whoever they want to talk to. Hopefully they tell them the truth. But as I say, the apartheid regime used to say that we were lying when we said boycott South African oranges.
As you say that, I just wonder, do you think we should send a delegation, not necessarily a government delegation, but maybe some kind of counter delegation to speak to the Congressional Black Caucus, senators who might be more leaning towards South Africa, maybe former President Obama, for example? Or do you think we should just leave it to the government to sort out, as someone who's actually seen this kind of movement up close?
Yeah, I would be inclined to say, let's leave the government and our diplomats to handle this issue. Because as civil society, South Africans, as I pointed out, we have no arguments with the Americans. We have no quarrel with the United States as South African civil society, as South African business, and so on. So to involve ourselves in what really is not the struggle of the civil society, this is an issue between, as I say, between the ANC and the Republicans. You see, the ANC, there's a big story around the United States and South Africa. The population has been helping us going back to the 19th century. For example, the Black American churches were very supportive, especially a church called the AME Church. It helped with this anti-apartheid struggle going way back, long before apartheid.
Wow.
To advance the rights of Black people in South Africa. They gave us scholarships. People like Charlotte Maxeke, remember, went to Black American universities in the United States. So they were supported, and Pixley Kaseme went to Columbia University. So the American public has been sympathetic to the suffering of African people, Black people in South Africa. So I'd rather myself say, let the government handle this and see, hopefully they can resolve the matter.
Just lastly on this, because there's also a lot going on at home that we need to cover. But I wonder what you think about, or how worried you are about the US pulling trade levers that could hurt the South African economy. And whether you think we are actually prepared, for a US that might withdraw, either cancel AGOA altogether or withdraw South Africa from AGOA, and what leverage we have in return. I mean, the only thing I can really think of is, for example, I know that we supply the US with about 70% of its platinum or something like that. But outside of that, I don't know if we really have any countermeasures that can get them to worry about leaving their relationship with us, given their size.
Yeah, I would be reluctant to turn this into a war or a trade war between South Africa and the United States that affects their industrial requirements. We have, according to the American embassy, we have more than 600 United States companies in South Africa.
Sure.
My suggestion would be that our private sector, our business community, business leadership, South Africa, business unity, South Africa, they should discuss with the South African government and arrive at a common understanding. And then they go to the American companies and to the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa and persuade the American Chamber of Commerce to influence the United States government in terms of AGOA. I think that would be a much better and a much softer intervention than an antagonism that, we supply you with 80% of your platinum, therefore we're going to impose sanctions on America. That I don't think that is the correct way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's going to be an interesting one to watch unfold. Of course, as all of this is happening, we ourselves have had something of a political earthquake in our country in the last election. And shall we just start with your reflections on the 2024 election, and how do you interpret what happened? Do you think that it was really a turning point? And how do you look at that moment?
Yes, I think it was a turning point. We have so many turning points in South Africa.
Every week
there's a turning point. But anyway, this one was an important turning point. It was a watershed election, in my view, because in a way, it marks the end of nationalism in South Africa. If you look at our history, since 1924, which is 100 years ago, South Africa has been ruled by nationalist parties. In 1924, the National Party won the election, 1920. And they were in power until 1994, except for a brief period during the Second World War, when they didn't want to fight against Germany, so they came out of the government. But from 1924 to 1994, they were in power, and these were Afrikaner nationalists. From 1994 to last year, we had African nationalists in power, which is the ANC. We forget that the ANC is a nationalist movement.
Yeah, it's in the name.
It's there in the name.
Yeah.
And it's there in its constitution, in its founding documents. If you look through its documents of the ANC Youth League, for example, in the 1940s, when it was founded, very clearly says we are an African nationalist organization.
Yeah.
What happened, first, the Afrikaner Nationalist Party lost. So that was the end of Afrikaner nationalism in 1994. That was really end of the road for that one.
Yeah.
What has happened is that it is now the end of the road for African nationalism. Because the African population, the African voters, are saying you are no longer representing our interests. So they stop voting for it, which is what happened in 1920. So what happened in our last election, that's why it's a watershed moment, because it's the end of the nationalist era. Now, the nationalist era, of course, has been a very important part of Africa and part of the third world, if you will. It's part of Asia, it's been part of South America. So it's part of the third. It's been a huge moment in the history of the third world, the nationalist era. In our case, it came to an end with the last election because the population who have been voting for African nationalism are saying, this is not helping us, it's not solving our problems, so we are going to stop voting for it. But of course, the challenge is, what do they replace it with? What do we replace it with? I think the government of national unity is an interim kind of manifest. It's not a solution it's not a solution to the demise of African nationalism. It's not a replacement to the demise of African nationalism. It's an interim measure while the country is looking for where do we go to from here.
Do you think, you've said it's the end of the road for African nationalism. Do you think it's the end of the road for the ANC? Or the beginning of the end, maybe?
Unless there's a very radical restructuring of the ANC away from nationalism. First, for example, it has to reject black-related policies, black advancement type policies, like black economic empowerment, employment equity, and so on. I can't see the ANC doing that. But these are the policies that its voters, who are the African voters, are rejecting. They are saying these policies are doing nothing for us as the voters. So I think the ANC is locked into like a Greek tragedy in a way. We can all see that what it is doing will end up destroying the ANC. But the ANC itself says we can't do anything else. So that's what happens to the hero in a Greek tragedy. Everybody can see that what they are doing will lead to their destruction, but they can't stop what they're doing. Something is holding them to carry on doing, and then at the end of the day, they just disappear.
You mentioned that you don't think the GNU is a solution, or at least a full solution to the problem. What have you made of the GNU so far? I mean, we're actually not so far away from this GNU being a year in office. Yeah. How do you assess how it's performed so far?
Well, for me, the GNU is a holding operation. So as a holding operation, I think it's doing quite well.
Yeah, we're exactly where we were, and not 1 inch further.
No, we haven't moved anywhere. We are exactly where we were before. And the DA, which is a new entrance into national government, is preoccupying itself with laws which were passed in the last parliament, which have nothing to do with the present parliament. The Bella Act was passed in the last parliament.
Yeah.
The Expropriation Act was passed in the last parliament. I don't know what other. So the DA is preoccupying itself with laws that were passed before. Are they going to review all the laws for the last 30 years? I mean, now, if you are going to spend your time reviewing the laws for the past 30 years, when is the country going to come up with a new solution to its present problems if you are preoccupied with what happened 30 years ago or during the last 30 years? So it's a holding operation, and we do need a holding operation because the ANC has been voted out by the voters, but there isn't a big enough party to replace it. So we're caught in this holding operation. And it's better to have a holding operation than to have anarchy. So the government of national unity, it should be called the government of holding unity. But anyway, it will do as a government of national unity. It's a holding operation.
Yeah. I mean, the big dispute right now seems to be around the budget and VAT, which is really maybe the first new test as the government processes these old laws. And we do seem to be at an interesting point where, as you say, I mean, the ANC seems to be wanting to die on the hill of a tax increase at a time when voters have absolutely decimated the party. They seem intent on pushing through a very unpopular tax increase, and now they need to find partners. And it looks like most of the big opposition parties are washing their hands of this proposal. I mean, what do you make of this VAT situation that we're in?
Yes, I think especially VAT. I think it's a suicidal. But again, as I say, in a Greek tragedy, the hero is committing suicide, but he doesn't understand. That's what he's doing. VAT taxes the very same people who vote for the ANC, which are the poor African people in the townships and in the villages. That's who VAT punishes. But the ANC is proceeding to go and punish them. That's why I'm saying, if you put it like a Greek tragedy, then you understand that the guy is running to the edge of the cliff, and everybody's saying there is a cliff there. Stop! You're gonna get killed if you jump over. No, the guy is running straight.
We insist.
And then he falls over.
Yeah. It's a strange, tragicomedic situation. As
it is sad. It is a sad situation.
What is your reading, by the way, of why the ANC can't remake itself or do these very obvious and what seems to me not to be too difficult things of just getting governance right and just getting serious about corruption and not doing this VAT increase? I mean, because it is quite a mysterious situation. I mean, my own take is maybe the NEC is just so unwieldy, and the president perhaps wants to keep consensus, and in trying to keep consensus, all you keep doing is running for these cliffs. But other than that, I actually can't understand why the ANC doesn't dig itself out of this electoral hole.
Well, it's a very complicated, because you have to put yourself in the shoes of the ANC leadership. The ANC has been fighting since 1912 to get treated in the same way as the white people. That's really what the ANC has been fighting for. Now, after many decades, it eventually succeeds to become the government of the country. So, how do you become like the white people? The only way you become like the white people is to live like the white people. So what does the ANC do when it becomes the government? First, it incentivizes the white civil servants to leave the civil service. It replaces the civil service with its own black civil service, with its own, actually African, let's be more accurate, with its own. But having put them there, then it had, for them to now be like, to have the same standard of living and the same lifestyle as the white people, which is what it has been fighting for all along. That's what it interpreted as justice. What does it do? It inflates the salaries for its cadres who are in the public service. But now, and then it passes laws like black economic empowerment to say, you, the private company, you have to give my cadres, my people, these privileges, that privilege, this much wealth and that much wealth. But what they are not saying is that actually it is dividing their own constituencies. Because not all of us can be highly paid civil servants. Not all of us can get BE deals from so-called white-owned companies. So a new class amongst the Africans starts to emerge, a privileged class. of the BE tycoons, which we used to call the usual suspects, like our president, who were the beneficiaries of these BE deals and became billionaires. I mean, they were actually not producing anything. They were riding on the back of the struggles of the millions of South Africans.
Sure. Yeah.
So they created a narrative that if I become a billionaire, somehow you benefit. Now the people are realizing that actually they benefit and we don't benefit.
Yeah.
But now it's very difficult to move yourself out of that. So they've captured the state. The ANC government has the ANC has captured the state. It is paying its civil service phenomenal salaries. But to pay those phenomenal salaries, you have to tax the economy. So the economy is unable to create new jobs because you are taking away the resources that it needs and giving them as high. So the unemployment is going up and up. But these are the same people you want to vote for you. But you are making them more unemployed. You are making them more poor. And now you pass a VAT law to increase VAT by 2%. So you have some sob story about how it won't affect you and so on. So that's the trap which the ANC has caught itself in. Now, what the ANC needs, if I can suggest, is a Deng Xiaoping.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
You see, the ANC needs a Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was a communist, one of the top communists. I think he was trained in France by the French Communist Party. And he was a big follower of Mao Zedong. He was one of the military commanders of the communist armies during the Long March and during the revolution. But he realized that the economic policies of state-owned, of the state owning every business were not working. Were not working in China. So he had to fight Mao's appointed successors. There was a group called the Gang of Four. He had to fight the Gang of Four, and it was very ugly, which included Mao Zedong's wife. He had to fight the Gang of Four to say, we have to open up the economy to Western multinationals because that's where knowledge about modern practice methods are. And they did it, and look where China is today. It was complete change in the Chinese Communist Party. The ANC, unless it does the same thing, it's just gonna go further and further down, taking the economy down with it.
You've made a very interesting call recently to say that actually South Africa needs a new political party.
Yeah.
And you've called for capital to actually dig in its pockets and fund such a new initiative. Why do you think, given how many political parties we already have, we in fact need a new party?
Yes, but you see, Caesar, the parties we have in South Africa, which are clones of the ANC, are the same social group, which is the African middle class. That's who our political parties are. The ANC, at the end of the day, has always been the party, going back to the 19th century, has always been a party of the African middle class. It formed alliances with various other, with the working class, with traditional leaders, with the Indians, with Jews, with communists, and so on. It formed alliances to fight apartheid. But it remained the party of the African middle class. And once it got into power, it dumped most of these allies that it had and advanced the interests of the African middle class. So the many parties that we have in South Africa, there are over 300 or 600. I can't remember. I was listening to the IEC saying they are going to cancel some of them. There's huge number, but they're all clones of the ANC. They're middle class parties. So which class then in South Africa does not have its own party? The working class doesn't have its own party. Okay, I think AfriForum is trying to be a party of the Afrikaans working class. But the African working class don't have their own party. The capitalists in South Africa, black or white, they don't have their own party. As I say, the ANC is a middle class party. The white capitalists don't have, the DA is not a capitalist party. It's a middle class, English speaking white middle class party. It's not a capitalist party. The poor don't have a party of their own. So when you look at our political landscape, the only social group that has a political voice and a political party is the African middle class at the end of the day. Okay, people like Gayton Mackenzie are trying to replicate this African middle class party with a colored middle class party. But it won't make much of a difference because the African population is 80% of the population. So when it comes to political numbers in a democracy, numbers are everything. So at the end of the day, you need then a new party that represents the other groups that have no parties of their own. The capitalists are one of those. The workers are one of the South African Communist Party is a faction of the ANC. It's not it calls itself a party of the workers. It is not a party of the workers. It's a faction of the nationalists in the ANC. And it's a middle class faction of the part of the ANC. So the workers don't have their own party. And then the poor, we have huge part of our population, 60%, if I remember, are classified as poor. They don't have their own party. So that's the context in which I said that.
I take it then you don't think either the EFF or MK represent working class
no,
or the poor?
These are the chips of the old bloc of the ANC. They don't represent. Look at what's happening to the EFF. It's going nowhere. The poor, the unemployed are becoming more and more. The poor are getting poorer and poorer. Where is the EFF? It's stuck at 9%. So they don't see, the poor themselves don't see the EFF. Ironically, if you look at who supports the EFF, it's a huge part of them are university students. Now, those are not working class. A huge part of them are young professionals, are young African male professionals. They are not middle class. They are part of the new middle class in South Africa. So no, those parties don't represent the poor and they don't represent the working class.
Dan, before we get back to the episode, we just want to let you know we have a big goal on this channel to build this community to 1,000 members. That means we have 2 new levels of SMWX membership. The first level gives you exclusive access to content, discounts on merch, but the second level, in addition to various other perks, gives you access to me. We're going to have meetups, online sessions. You're going to get discount on our live events. So if you want to deepen your SMWX community experience, help us get to that 1,000 member level. Look forward to seeing you there. So you're calling for a new party, or do you actually want to see both a party that actually firmly says, I represent the capitalist interests, and a workers' party as well?
No. If the workers want a party of their own, they can form a party. If the capitalists want a party of their own, But if we're trying to address the issue, which to me I think is the primary challenge of South Africa, which is economic growth, then you need the capitalists to be in the political decision-making equation. Whether they are there on their own or they are there with the workers, or they are there with the poor. They have to be central to that, because they are the only ones who know how to grow the economy. And for us to address the stagnation, the poverty, the unemployment, we need the capitalists to feel that their interests are protected, their ownership, their assets are secure. Let me give you an example, which is what happens when you have middle-class parties like we have in South Africa. Many years ago, the South Koreans decided that there is a certain size of ship that was not being built, which they called a small tanker. But actually, it's a 30,000-ton ship, which is very big. They said nobody's building these tankers. So they decided that they want to come and build this ship in South Africa. So I was asked by the ambassador to work with them and to help them look at how they go about this. So I went to Transnet, to their Portnet division, and I said, this is what these folks want to do. Can you help them? So we set up a working group with the Koreans. The company was called Daewoo Shipbuilding and Engineering Company.
Right.
So we worked together with Transnet. We looked at where they would place a shipyard. Shipyard is a massive installment, as you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they kept asking me, what about our property rights? Are property rights safe in South Africa? So I said, you don't have to worry, our constitution. So I read them the parts of the constitution. So one day I get called by our Korean partner to say, the main shareholder, the president, wants to see you in Seoul. So I said, sure, I'll pay for myself. I'll go and see the president. And the president of Daewoo Shipbuilding was a Korean development bank.
I see.
So I flew off and went to see the guy. And he took me out for lunch, just him and me, and wanted assurances about the security of property rights in South Africa. And I gave him all assurances. Then I come back and we identified Richards Bay as being where this shipyard was going to be built.
Yeah.
Then, unrelated to what we're doing, the ANC kicks out its president, which was President Mbeki.
Ah, right. Okay. So this is...
So now the Koreans come to me now I got interviewed. Okay, this is what happened. I got interviewed by the Star as to what do I think about President Mbeki being kicked out. So I said, this is unconstitutional. And I spelled why it was unconstitutional.
Sure.
So the following day I get a call from the Koreans. They said, your constitution can't protect your president. How is it going to protect our shipyard? We're out of here. And that was the end of the project. So, you see, the middle class doesn't care about the production environment because they live off state revenues, the tax system and so on. They don't care about whether Daewoo Shipbuilding rights are protected or Daewoo Shipbuilding feels assured that they are protective right. They pointed out to me that a shipyard has a lifespan of 50 years. So they have to be assured that in 50 years, their property rights will be.
Yeah.
Now you have seen the ANC passes an expropriation law, not just expropriation, but without compensation. So then if you are a foreign investor, how do you feel about your asset in South Africa? You see, this is one of the problems of having government by the middle class who don't own any assets themselves. They have no consciousness of the importance of property rights. But property rights are fundamental to job creation. They are fundamental to the to the environment. They are fundamental to the development of an economy. And this is why the absence of the capitalists from our body politic as a major player is a huge problem for us and for the development of our economy. And that has to be addressed. The middle class are not interested in it. Even the white middle class are not interested in it.
What do you think we need to do to actually grow this economy at the kind of rate that we need to grow it at? I suppose another way of asking that is, what do you think such a party would have to advocate for? Because it does seem to me that we have a lot of ingredients to be a very dynamic economy, even a very dynamic region. And of course, we've been stagnating for, goodness knows how long now. Mm-hmm. So what do you think it is that we need to do? And just finally, to build on what you've said, we do also have this massive inequality and poverty that we need to grapple with. And I appreciate that you are not a big fan of BEE, clearly, or of more direct measures like expropriation without compensation. But then how do we grow the economy while making sure that as we grow, we don't just maintain the patterns of inequality that have already been etched into our economy?
Well, as you say, the inequality in our economy is etched into the economy. It is etched into our history. Why did we get this inequality? We got our inequality in South Africa, if I can put it, by creating artificial scarcity of skills, of skilled people, of professionals, of artisans. That's why we have so much. That's what's at the bottom of the inequality of South Africa. In the 19th century and in the 20th century, there was a creation of scarcity by restricting professions to whites only.
Sure.
So that created an artificial scarcity of skills and of professionals. So their salaries, those who created that artificial scarcity, their salaries shot through the roof because they were scarce. What has happened after democracy? This system has continued. The system of continued artificial scarcity. Our education system hasn't been changed to mass produce skilled people. If anything, if you look at the Asians, Asia mass produces skills people. That's why Asia is more equal. China every year produces 600,000 engineers. So there's no premium on being a skilled person. In South Africa, there's a huge premium because there are very few of you. Our education system suppresses the production of skilled people. And hence this. So where do we go then? Having said that, where we have to start, which is what a political party controls, we have to start with the civil service. The South African civil service is the highest paid in the world as a percentage of GDP. A few years ago, the South African government invited the International Monetary Fund to come and study the salaries of the public service. And they concluded that the public service in South Africa earns 16% of GDP. Similar countries to us at the level of development, like Chile in South America, Thailand in Asia, is only 6% of GDP goes to public service salaries.
Wow, that's quite staggering.
So it's a huge amount of money that is going to civil service pay.
So everything we produce as a country in a year, 16% of that must go back to
the salaries of the public service.
And then we want to increase tax.
Yes,
to pay for that.
To all that.
In part.
So what we should be doing is to say, take that, to cut the civil service pay back to similar countries, and take that 10% that we save and put it into investment, into building infrastructure, into building new universities and so on and so forth. That today, our investment as a percentage of GDP is only 15%. If we took that 10% and added, we'll go up to 25%, which will put us where we were when we were building the stadiums in the beginning of 2000.
Yeah, the good old days.
Exactly. That's what it would do for us. So the first obstacle we're sitting with in South Africa is the overpaid public service. But the public service is part of the middle class that controls political power. And the ministers, by the way, are included in this pay. Did you know that the president of South Africa earns more money than the chancellor of Germany?
I didn't know that.
South African economy is a fraction of the size of the German economy. But our president earns more money than the chancellor of Germany.
Not that he needs a lot more money.
Yes, he has other ways of earning. But his pay. So this is an illustration of how the middle class parties are using their power to enrich themselves through taxing the rest of the economy. And that is what is driving our stagnation. Now, if you went to the government of national unity and said, take off 20% of GDP from the salaries, they will all refuse. Because all of them, whether they're DA or ANC, are being paid these phenomenal salaries. The town clerk in Cape Town is earning the same salary as the town clerk in Johannesburg, and these are hugely inflated salaries. The mayor of the DA, the mayor of the ANC, the mayor, who else is there? Got a mayor. They are all being paid this phenomenal salary. So to come back to your question, what should we do to kickstart the South African economy to get it to where it was in 2005, when it was like starting to pick up?
Absolutely.
We have to cut back on this overspending on the salaries of the public service. Then that gives us a foundation on which to start building, because according to the National Development Plan, we should be at 30% of GDP going to investment instead of consumption, which is what these huge salaries do. So that is the short answer to you. Now, who is going to do it? As long as the middle class control the political power, they will never allow you to do it. Unless you get a Deng Xiaoping who reforms, which we are not getting.
Let's imagine for a bit, and because I really do feel like the discourse is so impoverished these days that we don't have room for creative economic ideas anymore. And let's assume for a moment that we were able to unlock this revenue. What do we do then? You know, I had a very interesting young economist and public intellectual on the channel, Zimasa Vabaza, and he was saying he also went to China. And something stuck with me from what he said, where he spoke to some economic planners and they said, if you want to grow an economy, first you need to build a road. And they were speaking about the importance of strategic infrastructure projects. And I look at our country and I think it's so ripe for those kind of projects. Like we haven't really connected Joburg and Cape Town with rail properly. We haven't, or even Joburg and or Gauteng and KZN. So massive transport projects, that would seem to me to be one venue. I mean, before we get there, even just fixing
Yes.
what we have, what do you think we could do as a country, let's say if we had the room to do it?
We would fix it. We would fix what we have.
Yeah.
Just to give you a figure, I was on a board of one of the small companies of Transnet many years ago. This company was doing railway concessions in other African countries. Then freight on South African railways was something like 230 million tons was running on on the railway infrastructure. Today, I read somewhere, it's 150 million tons. And the rest has gone to the road, to the trucks, because of the mismanagement of the railway infrastructure, the maintenance of the infrastructure, and all that.
Absolutely.
Every day you see trucks coming from the copper belt, delivering copper to Durban. That copper should be on railways. But our railway infrastructure from DRC to Durban is not maintained. So those are the things that need to happen. And if they started to happen, they'll make a huge difference. I mean, when the economy was growing in the 2000s, you could feel South Africa was moving somewhere.
Absolutely.
There was the Gautrain was being built, the new stadiums were being built, the country was buzzing, unemployment was going down.
Airports were coming up.
Yeah, and the morale of the population was and the airports were being refurbished and so on. So that's what would happen.
Yeah.
Just by cutting this public service and transferring it back into investment.
You mentioned the president's salary earlier, and I wonder if we could move on to how you assess President Ramaphosa's time in office. I think he's been president for 8 years now, which is a very long time to be in power. That's a whole 2-term U.S. presidency.
Yeah.
And we had Mr. Tokyo Sehwale here, who said he thinks he's in the departure lounge because there's an ANC conference coming up. How do you assess what President Cyril Ramaphosa has done as president?
Well, I think President Ramaphosa has been a very weak president for the ANC. He's not been able first to control his own party. He's not really controlling the ANC. He's not controlling his cabinet, which is why, ministers say all sorts of things. Gwede Mantashe says one thing, the government decides we have to do something about green energy. He says no, he's going to keep burning coal, and he's still a minister, despite contradicting what the government is saying. So for me, he has been, again, coming back to that word, holding operation. He's been a holding operation. I think he sees himself as weak in the scheme of things. The ANC has its own inner circles. So he feels that he's not part of the inner circle. And so he hasn't got the muscle to enforce the ANC's own decisions, because they have to be enforced. He doesn't feel he's strong enough to insist that decisions must be enforced. And so what you have is a rather hectic, chaotic government. And it becomes even more hectic and chaotic now that it's in partnership with other political parties in the government of national unity. I mean, you can see DA ministers talking about me as a DA minister, I'm doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But he's part of Mr. Ramaphosa's cabinet. He should be speaking about what the cabinet is doing. But because he feels, well, there's nobody to stop me talking about me representing the DA. So he goes ahead and says, I was listening to one, I think it was public and works person, praising himself about doing this as a DA minister and what have you. So at the top level of the ANC and the top level of the cabinet, there's lack of control.
I must say, I've never thought of it from the perspective of him not having control over some of the inner circles of the ANC. I always thought he had quite a firm grip over the party.
No, he doesn't. I mean, factions like the Communist Party, they're out there literally destabilizing the country by claiming they're going to nationalize this, they expropriate that, and X, Y, Z. So, but for example, he should be enforcing the rule, the decision that was made many years ago that all government pronouncements, except for the president, are made by the Government Communication and Information Service, by the head of the government information. This was a decision made many years ago. No, ministers, some of them, I was listening, I think, to Bladen Zimandi or something, saying, I'm doing X, Y, Z as a minister. No, that should be made by the Government Communication and GCIS, Government and Information Service, not by a minister, let alone the minister himself. But President Ramaphosa can't enforce it. He just can't enforce it. But it's there. That's why this department was created. They all bypass it and they all publicize themselves. He can't control that situation.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, Mr. Mbeki. I guess there's one question which we ask to all our guests, which we haven't yet covered, and that is, if there's one thing you would like to see changing in South Africa, what would that be?
Well, the one thing we have to do in South Africa is focus on our human capital. That is the one. The World Bank publishes something called the Human Capital Index. South Africa, this index covers 169 countries. Number one in the Human Capital Index, which is how you use your human resource and your people's skills. Number one is Singapore. Number two is Hong Kong. Number three is Japan. Number four is South Korea. South Africa is number 132
Sheesh.
In that index. So if we want to be part of the modern productive world, the modern economy, we have to address our human capital, our human resource capability. Without doing that, you're going nowhere. You can do that 10% I recommended, but at the end of the day, it will get you nowhere if you don't have, because now we need skills IT people, we need skilled artificial intelligence people and all the rest of it. We need skilled media people like yourselves, but that requires a lot of development of human resources of the country. If you are number 132 in the World Human Capital Index, then you can't do any of those. You don't have the skills to do any of those things. You know, just in conclusion, to give you an example of South Korea. When I was a student in the United Kingdom in the 1960s, the South Koreans came and recruited car engineers, automobile engineers, to go and teach them how to make cars. This was in the 1960s.
Wow.
And these guys, they were from a British company, famous British automobile company called Leyland. And it was floundering at the time. So they recruited engineers from British Leyland, took them to South Korea, and they trained them how to make cars. The last time I was in South Korea a few years ago, Korea was 6th in the world in the production of cars.
Absolutely.
And if you go out on the street today, you will come across a Korean-made car. They make it themselves. But somebody else trained them, but they took the initiative to say, please come and help us, train us.
Sure.
We don't know how to do it. And today they know how to do it.
And then they got their trade and the industrial policy right to be able to export those cars.
Right.
And I mean, you look
we can do it too.
Why not?
Nobody's stopping us.
Absolutely.
We are stopping ourselves with our own prejudices, our own eat now, work later, and that sort of mindset that we have.
Well, Mr. Mbeki, it's been such an honor to have you. I've been trying to get this interview going for quite a number of years, so it's a privilege to have had you. Thank you for sharing your insights and being so forthright.
Thank you, Cyril. It's good to see you.
Thank you so
much. And thanks to your camera people as well.
Absolutely. Oh, no, this team, shout out to this team. Thank you very much, because I always forget to give them a shout out, and they are the best in the business in my view. So thank you very much, and my producer as well, Oratile. So like, share, and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mr. Moeletsi Mbeki. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's continue the debate down below in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe to SMWX, you become a member, help us reach that next milestone of 250,000 subscribers, and keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.